I would like to give you some instructions on how week 7 should look in case you had questions on that. Here's an example of how it looks when each type of fat is correctly accounted for in items. I understand a lot of people are eating very low in fat foods, but if you're eating some meat products, there will be some saturated fat with that. And if you have a percent of fat over here, and what you fill in these columns doesn't get even close to 24%, that means that you haven't correctly analyzed what kind of fat it was, because it's either a saturated fat or a trans fat or monounsaturated or polyunsaturated fat. And if it is a saturated fat, you will then have cholesterol to some extent. Are getting to know your foods pretty well, you'll realize that some fruits and vegetables like avocado that have fat, but they will be good fat. The good fats are right here. This assignment will help you to understand where the good fat and where the bad fat is, and that you definitely do need fat in your diet, and the percentage is the other factor that you're going to be dissecting more carefully because of this lookup. So nuts and seeds and grains and saturated fat from meats are those items that we're going to be noticing in here. Oils such as canola oil or extra virgin olive oil, those will all appear in these columns. So here's day 1, day 2, all very carefully plotted in here. It would be okay with me if you want to round up or round down when you have decimals. That's perfectly fine. The total in this particular case, you will need to do nothing on the totals worksheet as opposed to what you needed to do on week 6 for the fruits and vegetables. So then let's go ahead and look at the answer page. So here's where you're going to be doing the evaluation. All evaluations again based on your total calorie intake. So we know for a fact that this person was within range because they came up with 25% of their intake of fat as 25%, which it falls in the range. So technically, you could go ahead and answer right on for this one, but I want to also have you illustrate for me that you know how to calculate how many grams of fat that equals and how many kilocalories of fat that equals within the range of 20 to 35%. So I'm going to show you the math. And so let me just show you how to do the math for that again. So we have to start with the total calorie intake. For you, it would be different. We're going to multiply it by the low number, 20%, and we get a total 260. So that's what she's got. We are now figuring the amount of kilocalories of fat that is 20%. So that would be 260. So while we're here, we're also going, since we have this kilocalorie number, we're going to find out how many grams that also equals. So we need to do that by dividing by 9, and that's going to give us 29. So now we also know that 260 kilocalories of fat is also equal to 29 grams of fat. So if you're counting grams for the day and you're aiming for 20% of fat for your daily intake, then you would know to stop at 29 grams. If you're aiming for 35, which is the upper number, still acceptable, let's do that. So we start again with 1300 and we multiply it by 65%. And now we're going to get kilocalories. 845 would be the correct number. So we're going to take that number. We've got now the upper range. 35% of her daily intake of 1300 calories is 845. So let's find out what the grams is. We're going to divide by 9. And the grams is 93. So it's possible that she wants to keep her percentages lower, but just to note, she did have more room to play with in her intake of fats. The correct range would be 29 to 93 grams of fat, or 260 to 845 kilocalories. So this second item, saturated fat, is also supposed to be inside of the 35%, but 10% of your 35% should be from saturated fat. So you'll remember you also worked on this number when you were doing sugars in last week. So let's start with that number. Starting with 1300, 10% of that would then be 130. We're now talking about kilocalories, but what I wanted you to find out was how many grams that is. So you would know you should stop at how many grams of saturated fat before you're over the recommendation. So then we divide by 9 and we get 14 grams. So that's what she got. 14 grams is correct. So when we're doing the evaluation now, knowing the range, she came in under 14 grams of saturated fat. So lower is better in saturated fat. Being in the range for these two areas is good because these are healthy fats. This is the one you want to stay below 300, and then go ahead over here and do your evaluation. I wouldn't mind if you wrote me some little notes so I can see what you're thinking or what your questions are, or if you're having some concerns, and I will respond to you in my grading feedback.